This video will be about sine, cosine, and tangent. So when you're given a random triangle to solve for a side, first, on any triangle like this, when we're using trigonometry to solve, we need to label which side is adjacent, which side is opposite, and which side is hypotenuse. So across from the right angle is always the hypotenuse. Then we look at where the angle is that they gave us. They gave us 23 here in that right corner. Across from that is considered the opposite. And then whatever's left over, that's adjacent. So we look at the side that has stuff given or has a variable there. So opposite doesn't have anything written on it. It's not needed. So now we look at our three different formulas. We have sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent, where in this case, the x's for the formulas are the angles. These are talking about the angle itself, not necessarily the x I have written on the triangle. So we were given an adjacent side and a hypotenuse. So looking at our formulas, the only formula that has both adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine. So in order to solve for x, I'm going to have to choose cosine. I would have cosine of the angle they gave us 23 degrees is the angle, equals adjacent, that was 8, over hypotenuse, which is x. So cosine 23, that's one entire thing. We can't split that up. And we've got to get x by itself, but we don't like when x is in the denominator. So there's two ways we can think of this. We can think, okay, I've got to multiply both sides by x so I can get x into the numerator. And after I do that, to get x entirely alone, I would have to divide by the entire thing cosine 23. That, I know, looks like it's two things, but it's really actually one thing. So then we would go plug that into our calculator. 8 divided by cosine 23 is 8.6909. I did a couple of decimal places. It depends on how many they ask for. I just went 4. So the second way you can think about it is if you recognize, hey, when x is in the denominator, I can do this one trick. And I have a little name for it just to help you remember, switchy witchy. I'm going to switch the cosine and the x. If we switch spots, that gets us to the same place. All it's doing is recognizing a pattern and saying, hey, if I multiply by x and then divide by cosine 23, it's going to happen that way every time. I'm going to make a shortcut so I don't have to do it every time. I can just take my shortcut. But it still gets us the same answer of 8.6909. So let's do one more example, just for some more practice. So again, we label opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. I always start with hypotenuse because it's easiest. Across from the right angle. Opposite is across from the angle given. And adjacent is the extra. This time adjacent's not needed because it doesn't have a number or a variable there. So we have opposite and hypotenuse. I'm going to go back to the other page just for reference really quick. Looking at our three trig formulas, sine is the one that has both opposite and hypotenuse. So sine of 18 degrees equals opposite, which is x, over hypotenuse, which is 31. This time x is in the numerator, so all I have to do is multiply both sides by 31. So again, now I just plug this into my calculator. 31 times sine of 18 is 9.5795. You could also use these to solve for an angle. Let's say instead of solving for a side, they want you to find one of the angles inside. So again, we start the same way though, and we label. We have hypotenuse. The angle they want us to find is here, so the side across from the angle they want us to find is opposite. The last side is adjacent. Again, hypotenuse not needed, there's no numbers there or letters. So now we're going to be using tangent. Now they didn't give us the angle, so we just write tangent x. That's what we're going to be looking for, equals opposite over adjacent, 8/6. So now, to get x alone, tangent x, I've told you multiple times, it's one thing. So there is only one way to get rid of tangent, and that is called the inverse tangent. Now it's kind of weird because most of the time we put the opposites below. This is the first one that we put in front of our terms on both sides. So tan inverse, tan -1 means tangent inverse, gets rid of the tangent and leaves you with just x. The other side, tan inverse of 8/6, you're just going to have to plug into a calculator. So when you plug it into a calculator, usually you have to use some sort of second or inverse button. It'll either have second or it'll have INV for inverse. You'd have to hit second, and then usually it's in the same spot as tangent. So by hitting the second button, it makes the tangent button do a second operation. And then plug in the 8 divided by 6. That gives you 53.13. Usually with these, they will round to the nearest whole number, so I would say 53 degrees. And that covers our sine, cosine, and tangent functions.